Welcome to another episode of the Daily Apologist Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Meadows, and I hope you guys are doing amazing. And today I want to talk about something about talking. And one of the things that all of us are about to do here shortly is get together, most likely with family, for Christmas and New Year. And there are obviously, as the old adage goes, there's two things that you're never supposed to talk about, and that's religion and politics. But as we read in the New Testament, God tells us, and Jesus tells us, that we're to go out and we're to open our mouths and talk to people about the good news of Jesus Christ. So, how do we navigate those sometimes difficult conversations with our family and with our friends who may not share the Christian worldview? And what I want to do is I want to lay out three questions and a piece of advice for you in this podcast that will help you more effectively navigate those conversations about faith and more specifically about the Christian worldview and the gospel. And so the first thing that we want to do before any conversation that we have or that we're expecting to have about faith is we really want to do kind of a spiritual inventory and make sure that we have the right attitude for those conversations. So many times as we look on the news or we look at some sports debate show, it's just two talking heads yelling back and forth. And it's either whoever lands the most blows, the most jabs, the sharpest verbal jabs wins, or whoever talks the loudest, the longest wins the conversation. But that's not our goal. That shouldn't be the reason why we enter into these conversations, is to prove a point or to make sure that we land the sharpest verbal jab so that we have a story to tell everybody else after the holiday season is over with. We want to have a yielding, submissive, charitable spirit. And what I mean by that is I don't mean allow the other person to walk on you, but it's what Aaron Johnson from the Daily Apologist mentioned in one of his blogs. Maximal charity. We want to give as much space and meet on as much common ground as possible with the person on the other end. That doesn't mean that we just kind of fold like a cheap Walmart umbrella when we have these difficult conversations. We just whoa, that's getting, you're asking me too much. Too many questions, or we have this conversation and all of a sudden, they've brought up a dicey question about something that usually I would feel uncomfortable talking about. So that means I'm just going to step away, cede the ground, cede the conversation. That's not at all what I'm talking about. What I'm specifically talking about is an attitude that expresses the love, mercy, and compassion of Christ to the other person on the opposite end of the table or opposite end of the conversation. So once we have that attitude in place, we can then begin to navigate these conversations. And one of the first things that we want to do, one of the first questions asked actually, that we want to ask in these conversations is, what do you mean by that? And you might be kind of looking like, what are you talking about? Why would we ask that question? What do you mean by that? So when I ask this question, what I'm telling the other person through that question is, I want you to clarify to me what exactly that position is, or what do you mean by that word, or hey, could you give me some clarification about the proposition that you just made or the claim that you just made? And the reason that I do that is twofold. One, I am telling the other person through that question that I am willing to listen to them and I want to hear what they have to say. And we should come at each one of these questions with a genuine heart regarding the conversation. We don't do it, in a deceptive way, or a or a gotcha kind of way. We do it because we really want to know what they have to say, and so we ask them, "Hey, what do you mean by that?" And so then that gives them the opportunity to tell us what they mean by that. It gives us the ability to analyze whether the person on the other end of the conversation really does know what they mean by what they just said. So we kind of know if this person has, maybe done their homework, or they just parroting an argument that they heard either on YouTube or through a blog or through other social media platforms. And then the second question that we want to ask is, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Or how did you get there? Or, you know, how is that the finishing point of your journey, right? Those are, that's all, those are three different ways to say the same thing. I want to know how somebody moved from point A to point B in their life. So, for instance, you have a family member who maybe once was, a regular churchgoer, was once involved in the congregation that you are now still involved in, but then they left either, during high school or after college, or maybe it was after, they got married and had kids. I don't know. But you just simply ask the question, okay, so help me understand this. You know, back here, you were a Bible believing Christian who believed that morality stemmed from God's nature. And now you believe that morality is a matter of personal preference. How did you get from point A to point B? Walk me through that. How did you arrive that this over here was no longer true, and that morality is a matter of preference is the way that morality actually functions? And so, in that question, it's not just a matter of clarifying a specific statement. It's not just a matter of clarifying a specific term. What I want them to do is I genuinely want them to share with me, as much time as will allow, their journey, their life situation from point A to point B. And I want to analyze that. I want to ask the question, all right, does the journey that they've just taken, as they describe this to me, are there any significant points of contention there that maybe calls into question legitimately the Christian worldview? Or is this merely a emotional journey that isn't grounded in objective truth, it isn't grounded in objective facts? And then we can ask more probing questions about, that journey. So you said over here that the reason that you left the Christian faith was because of X, and you said that X was based upon a conversation or some type of treatment that you got in the church. Okay, well, is that a good reason to leave Christianity? Just because person X over here treated you bad, does that mean that Christianity is no longer true? So we allow them to share a journey, and then if something like that I just laid out is presented, we just nicely and kindly ask the question. And that's the third piece of the puzzle. We start asking what I like to call if-then questions, or make if-then statements, and say, okay, so if what you're telling me is right, this is what you've said, and so if what you said is true, then doesn't this follow? Or if what you said is true, then why would you give up Christianity just because somebody treated you bad? And I'm just giving you a scenario off the top of my head here, that could play significant could play a significant role in the conversations that you had. And so we continue down this line of reasoning, and the reason why this is so effective is because it really is them giving you permission to probe both their worldview, but also their life experiences, their life journey, without being super aggressive. So many times when we come into these conversations, because these conversations are so emotional, and because the person on the other end is somebody that we genuinely and deeply care about, we allow our emotions to get the better of us. And maybe this is somebody that we're frustrated with, and so instead of walking down these lines of questionings, or this line of questioning, we just want to tell them like it is and give them both barrels and say, listen, we've been talking for 10 years, and I don't understand why you haven't come back to the church. I don't understand why you haven't come back to Christianity. I just want you to know that if you keep on this journey, you're going to go to hell in a handbasket, and that's that. So either change or don't have anything else to do with me, right? Some of us, unfortunately, have had a conversation that went something like that. And I would just ask the question, if you've ever found yourself in that scenario, did you ever have a second conversation dealing with that person's uh, spiritual journey and the reason why they left Christianity, or why they left, uh, the faith, so to speak? I would venture to say that most of us have not. And even if we're thinking about personal evangelism, that type of approach is the number one way to guarantee that somebody will not talk to you again. I can remember, and just by way of example, these are the things not to do. I can remember doing a campaign to Utah, probably, oh man, it's been, geez, let me see, 8, 9 years ago or something like that. And we had set up a conversation with two Mormon elders. Now, Mormon elders are particularly young. And so we met at this park. I can remember it vividly. We met at this park, and they came and they sat down. And then all 7 of us, that's all 7 of us, sat down, and we proceeded to interrogate these guys. I mean, we ripped them apart. And uh, at the time, it felt really good because, we were doing, quote, the Lord's work. And we were trying to save these guys' souls, from the false teaching of the LDS Church. And lo and behold, as we sat there and smoked checked them for about 2 hours, when the time came to leave, I walked up to one of the guys and said, "Hey, when can we meet again?" And the guy looked at me and said, "Sir, with all due respect, I don't see us ever having another conversation." And at that moment, I was just like, well, he's just mad because he got the truth told to him. But as I reflect upon that scenario, the reason that he didn't want to have another conversation, that they didn't want to meet, wasn't because they had the truth told to them. It was because we had ambushed them, and we had treated them as if they were prisoners of war, and interrogated them and just absolutely crushed them verbally. I wish that I had known these tactics uh, then, because the conversation would have gone a lot differently. So that's the other piece of the puzzle. Make sure that when you're having these conversations, unless the person gives you permission to have that dialogue open and in public with other people, then try and set up a conversation privately, because people are more apt to be more open privately than they are uh, publicly. I wish that we would have done that. I wish it would only been 1 or 2 of us that had talked to these guys privately, and not set up this big throwdown at the park, because it just did not turn out well. So, and by way of review, make sure that before we enter into these conversations, we do a spiritual inventory check, and we ask ourselves the question: am I going into this conversation with the right attitude? Number 2, ask the question, hey, what do you mean by that? Whether it's clarifying statements, clarifying propositions, allow that person to tell you what they mean, because you might genuinely not know what they mean, or you might want to know, how well do they know this specific topic, or how well do they know, the nature of the proposition that they just put out there. And then we ask, okay, well, how did you get there, right? How did you arrive at that point? You started at point A, you got to point B. Walk me through that journey. That's us asking permission to know their life story. And when they start answering, that's them showing that they're willing to give you their life story. And then number 3, we ask, hey, the third question we ask are if then questions, or we make what I like to call if then statements. And then we make sure that uh, as we set up these conversations and move forward, it doesn't turn into what I like to call a smoke check. It doesn't turn into an ambush, things not to do. We don't set up public discourses during the holiday season unless they're open to it. We try and set up these discourses in a private manner so that we can really get to that genuine relationship and genuine conversation. So those are some tactics for talking with your friends and family members who are not Christians during the holiday season. My name is Dean Meadows. This is another episode of the Daily Apologist podcast. Equip yourself to engage culture.